So I gave you guys a little sneak peek yesterday, so you kind of know the topic. So powwow wisdom in a wildlife garden is what I'll be presenting on today. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I am here in what is currently known as Bentonville, Arkansas. The First Nations, first inhabitants of this area is the Osage Nation. And in fact, Bentonville was named Osage before it was named Bentonville because it was an Osage trading village. And then, as I've mentioned several times, I'm a member of the Kaw Nation of Oklahoma, which is located, our headquarters are located in Kaw City, Oklahoma. So I just wanted to share just a tiny bit of background and context of my project. And I think part of my motivation for doing this is like for, you know, the new folks this year and kind of being in your shoes, and giving you a little bit of, I don't know if it's inspiration or reassurance or just a little support of kind of how things started for me. But my original plan in February of 2020 was I was going to write a book. My project was going to be writing a book about healing self-identity through connection with nature. And I based that on, I was going to take all these epic trips to like Glacier National Park and Banff National Park and all these things. I had it all booked, reserved, paid for, and then March happened and the pandemic. So all of the travel was canceled. The byproduct of that was that we ended up like, you know, reclaiming all of the funds that we had invested into our traveling, and then decided that we were going to use that money to do this whole restoration of our backyard. And that's, you know, how we paid for like filling in our pool and these kinds of things. Now, parallel to that, what I did for the traveling piece and connecting with nature was I booked all of these local camping trips, so places that were within driving distance. And that's in my mind how I was going to do the connection with nature and still write a book about that. And then as I started researching landscape design, so it was never going to be a wildlife garden. It was going to be this very manicured, you know, looking spot. And so as I was researching landscape design, that's how I discovered wildlife gardening. And it was still at that point, I had no idea that this was going to be the journey. It's still like, you know, these things are happening in parallel to each other. But just, you know, to just describe how this happened was not intentional to begin with, but it unfolded very naturally and organically and in a very beautiful way. And then also in the spirit of, you know, we've talked about like sharing ways through like academia or maybe through Western science that kind of like gives us the one step in to kind of justifying our work. And I know that like this audience, we don't need that. But just as an example, like where different nursing scopes and standards of practice do highlight the importance of self-care and self-healing, and also environmental healing and environmental care, and how that does fall within the nurse's purview. So the question, and I think we talked about yesterday, was, you know, like sometimes the scholarly work is asking the question, maybe we never fully answer it, but we do ask, like, is my environment healing and is our environment healing? So to exemplify that, this is the photo of like my microcosm. So where I started with this pool that was falling apart, sitting just neglected. Like I said, it was installed in the early 1980s. It was really more of a money pit than something that was useful for us. So not a very healing environment, and probably a little bit damaging to the environment around it. On a macrocosmic level, our environment is suffering. And so a report from the National Wildlife Federation showed that 2.2 million acres of wildlife habitat are destroyed annually. And it's destroyed through what we call human alteration. And in my research about this, I found that my tribe, so the Kaw Nation, as things were really kind of ramping up as far as, being relocated and treaties being broken and things like this, the tribe as a whole started to experience what's known as solastalgia. And that is, it's emotional distress when you witness the destruction of the land around you, and that destruction leads to devastation of human cultures, habitats, sometimes entire species. And so we know that like those practices, that commercialization, capitalism, those kinds of things, like that's still happening now. So that can point to the answer of like, no, our environment is not healing as a whole at this moment. And so how does Indigenous wisdom apply here? So Indigenous wisdom is based in oneness, wholeness, interconnectedness, and something that, we've mentioned several times over the last couple of days. It's right relationship with the universal field of infinite love. And that's the basis for universal or for Indigenous wellness and healing. And then in a more kind of physical, like tangible sense, what's happening right now, the UN reported that 28% of the Earth's land is currently under Indigenous ownership or management, and these are the only lands that remain unaltered by humans or minimally altered. And so how I then connected to apply my own Indigenous wisdom to this work is this: I don't know anything about like our traditional healing. That wisdom just doesn't exist anymore. I don't know about the plants. I don't know about the practices. And I mentioned yesterday, we only have 3,000 members of our tribe left. The last full blood member died in the early 2000s. We have no written history in our own language. But what we do have is Pow-Wow dance, and that is how we connect to our sacred kind of connection and to each other. So with that, I will kind of unfold the story of Red's Wild Garden, which is the name of the garden space in my yard. And yeah, I'll start there. So as I unfold this, how it's kind of laid out is I have specific dances from our tribe that are aligned with specific kind of activities or discoveries that went on within the wildlife garden. And with each one of those, I have put a quote from Caring Science's Sacred Science that aligned with that. That's like kind of represents how this unfolded for me. So to start off with, from Caring Science's Sacred Science, assumptions related to human caring. So as a beginning, we have to impose our own will to care and love upon our own behavior and not on others. We have to treat ourselves with gentleness, loving kindness, equanimity, and dignity before we can respect and care for others with gentleness, kindness, equanimity, and dignity. This is important because this whole process started as a self-care and self-healing practice for myself. There was no kind of academic or intellectual motives attached to it at all. And I'll kind of tell you why and how that happened. So the first dance is the men's grass dance. And the purpose of this dance was before a sacred ceremony or before the camp was set up, the men grass dancers would come out. They dance in very wide, sweeping, symmetrical motions. And the purpose of the dance was to kind of stomped down the prairie grass in order to clear a space to set up for whatever was going to happen next. What I love about this is that this step is also sacred. And sometimes in our own practices, we minimize, skip over, don't pay a lot of attention to the setting intention and clearing the space. But from indigenous wisdom, we can draw from that to know that like clearing the space and setting the intention, that's the groundwork. So that's also a sacred practice. So in my garden, here again is that picture, the before picture of the really gross pool, labeling it as a bioacidic environment because it absolutely was harmful, both to the humans around and nature, all the beings. And then when we filled it in, removed the concrete, removed everything, and then just put a clean, fresh layer of topsoil down, and that turned it into a biogenic space. So now it was fertile and ready to nourish. And so the quote from Caring Science is Sacred Science that goes along with that is, these views, and this is referring to biogenic relationships, these views open us to notions of infinity and mystery of relationships and the impact of one person's humanity upon another. And you'll see like that's absolutely what happened with this process. So the next dance is the women's traditional dance. This is the one when I was 6 years old. That's when I led the dance circle and was granted with my my traditional name, which was Dahoka Hinga, which means little wind. And it was like in honor of my grandfather, whose name was Daje Sage, which means strong wind. So we are the wind people. But the women's traditional dance it's a very, the postures are dignified and graceful, and the women move in rhythm with the drum beat. And the purpose of it is we honor our women relatives, past, present, and future. So it is, the intention is honor and remember, dignity and grace. And in the context of the wildlife garden, this is how that happened. So you see the first picture on July 13th. I'd installed a mulch path like just right down the middle, but all the rest of the area I hand sowed native wildflower seeds. So every single seed on this whole area went through my hand. I used Reiki to infuse each seed with love and protection. And by August 3rd, so this is just about 2 weeks later, you see what happened, and then you see the progression over the next few weeks. And to me, this exemplifies like the earth honoring and remembering and nourishing these seeds. And just it was, almost no effort. And they were just like, the earth was like, oh, I'm here to nourish you. And the seeds were like, oh, I'm here to be nourished and then nourish other things. And the relationship was so symbiotic. In addition to that, I began every single morning, like I would walk through and water by hand the whole area. And so that daily practice of observing and listening, and I mean like listening, and receiving and being open, and the mindfulness and the spiritualness of all of it helped me to honor and remember myself. Like, why am I here? And then just kind of on a more, I guess, physical note, the wildlife gardening kind of criteria that I went by was from the National Wildlife Federation. And their criteria are this: you need sources of food, sources of water, cover from bad weather and predators, resources to reproduce, protect, and nourish the young, and sustainable practices to ensure that the environment stays healthy. So in this way, we know like that's not a far stretch to like literally or even like analogously apply the basics of wildlife gardening to our own selves. The quote from Caring Science as Sacred Science that I applied here is, "To attain a sense and experience of divine love, we have to give time and energy to this part of our daily lives, helping us to remember who we are and why we came." And that's what I experienced with my daily walks through the garden. My next dance that I'll tell you about is the women's fancy shawl dance. The theme of this dance is adapting and creating healing. And the story behind it is this: in the 1800s, the United States government passed a law called the Indian Offenses Act. It made all of indigenous practices, including speaking a language, cultural practices, dances, all of that, illegal. So in order to adapt and kind of like covertly continue to practice the sacred dances, men began to dance in Wild West shows, and they would do these what they called fancy dances. So it was a lot of like jumping around, bright colored feathers and big headdresses, and very showy. They also got paid for it. So the visitors to the Wild West shows paid for it, loved it. It became a spectacle. But then secretly, you know, the natives were like, "Oh, we're practicing our stuff," you know. And so then fast forward to the 1950s, women decided that, you know, we wanted our own part in that as well. And so the fancy shawl dance was created. And what they did with that is spread the shawl over both shoulders, and when they dance, it's fast movements. There's jumping, there's leaping, the shawls are spread out, and so it emulates the movement of a butterfly flying across the prairie. And this one is very interesting because in the grass dance, I mentioned that at no time did both feet leave the ground. Always one foot was in contact with the ground, so it's grounding. So this one, like, they leap and jump a lot, so it's more up in the air, okay? And so in the context of wildlife gardening, the adapting and creating healing can be kind of seen as the monarch butterflies coming in. So I planted milkweed, and my planting milkweed was kind of like, I guess, self-centered because I wanted to see, you know, the monarchs. I wanted them to come in, but this actually turned out to be like the healing moment for me. So the first picture, you can see the monarch caterpillar. The second picture, that the green chrysolite is a very early one, and then the clear one is one that's about to, the butterfly is about to eclose. Third picture is a butterfly actually eclosing. These are all from my garden. So these are all actually pictures and things that I witnessed. They're not stock photos. And then the last one is me releasing a monarch after they've eclosed. And it was at that moment when I was releasing that monarch that I recognized that she was going to take off and fly to Mexico. And between, you know, Northwest Arkansas and Mexico, what was she going to touch? What was she going to heal? What was she going to pollinate? Who was she going to be in contact with? And immediately it just clicked in my head, like the ethic of belonging, you know. And so that was the magic moment for me. And it was so magical. Actually, I have, let's see if I can turn it correctly. I have her tattooed on my arm. the one where she's coming out of the chrysolite. So and then this is the quote from Caring Science is Sacred Science that spoke to me about this whole event was the practitioner's need for their own evolving and repatterning from fear to love, a shift perhaps from head-centered personality, ego-centered work to heart-centered higher consciousness movement. And that the fear from fear to love was such an important part and such a profound part of this whole thing for me. And then the last dance I'll tell you about is the men's straight dance. The intention of this dance is to tell the story and share the wisdom. This is a very regal dance and kind of like a gentleman's dance is how we describe it in the tribe. The purpose of it is to tell the story of a victory. And so the men do this dance, and it tells a story of like winning a battle or a successful hunt. And during the dance, they're always moving forward because moving backwards would signify retreat. So they're always moving forward. Sometimes you'll see them looking down, and that signifies like they're searching for the path. They're searching for the right track. And then when they find the path, they'll like yell out in victory, and then they'll tell the story of how they were able to complete their quest successfully. And so this was the dance of my grandfather. I remember this one very well, and it is so beautiful to watch. And so in the context of what I'm working on, that's what I'm doing right now with you guys. It's, you know, having the story published in Beginnings, and, you know, to be determined on going further and how to share this with more people. But the quote from Caring Science to Sacred Science here is, "We belong and become the environment for our clients, colleagues, communities, systems, world, and ourselves. Together, we co-create a new reality for sharing our awakening to a higher consciousness." And I cannot put into words how much I experienced this firsthand. And so that, I want to just share just a tiny piece, and I won't spend too much time on this, about, you know, why this healing was important and how I got here. So in 2018, in January, I had a basketball-sized hepatic hemangioma. I had it removed, but then that night I hemorrhaged. It was a terrifying near-death experience, but thankfully they caught it and surgically repaired that. But from that experience, I had I've had and continue to have on some level a pretty rough battle with PTSD. And then 2 weeks after that happened, my dog, who's pictured here, his name is Red Foreman. If you've seen that 70s show, you know that character. But he somehow fell into our pool and drowned. He was 7 years old. And so it was like trauma stacked on top of trauma. And that's part of the reason also why that pool area was so like, the biocidity of it. I could not go in our backyard. I could not open the curtains that faced the pool. And so filling it in, and then having this experience and having this area that nurtured and healed in so many different ways was one of the most powerful things I've experienced. And so then the quote here is, "It starts with self and moves in concentric radiating circles out to all whom we touch physically, locally, non-locally, and energetically." And this is just a graphic representation of that quote. And the representation too of how this work, how unitary caring science, how acts of self-love not only radiate out to the universe presently, but also transcend time and space. And so I do believe that by giving my ancestors a voice, and you can see that here with the chief down in the left-hand corner, that's healing past generations. And then by finding a way to share this wisdom of connection with the earth and healing the earth, that's healing future generations. And then yeah, just a byproduct of, I had the social media account where I shared the photos of the monarchs and the flowers and different birds and these kinds of things. And I had other therapists like contact me and say, like, last fall, you know, like, this has been such a dark time, but I'm sharing your photos with my clients and I'm sharing your videos with my clients, and they're asking, like, how are things going, and they want an update on the butterflies and these kinds of things. And so it brought light to people in my own community. And then also the monarch, you know, the monarchs that migrated, and, you know, maybe they made it to Mexico, maybe they didn't, but they definitely left this place and went somewhere, you know. And so that's why I put that star there on the, you know, the monarch flying and that kind of global impact. So just kind of the summary of everything is, you know, there are professional standards that like identify health and of self and environment, you know, as far as the part of the nurse's standards of practice. And then what we know, more importantly, is like the discipline of nursing's morals and values call us to be stewards of our own health and the health of our environment. And then unitary caring science gives us a framework for translating self-care and healing from the microcosm, so from my swimming pool in my backyard, to the macrocosm, so from self to the universal field of energy. And I think within the discipline of nursing, but of course beyond, you know, that I think that could be applied generally speaking as well. Indigenous wisdom recognizes the interconnectedness and oneness of all living and non-living beings and provides a lens for the interdependence of the health of the individual, community, local environment, earth, and universe. And then unitary caring science and indigenous science acknowledge that healing can transcend both time and space. And we know that right now more than ever, that's so important. And because, and this is just kind of the main takeaway here, because all beings, living and non-living, belong to the same universal field of infinite love, the action of love towards self is also an action of love towards all. And maybe more specifically, an action of healing towards self is an action of healing towards all. And then I'll go ahead and open it up to questions and comments, but I just have some other photos that I'll flip through just for your viewing pleasure.
I'm speechless and breathless and in tears. It was absolutely magnificent. Talk about a sacred experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the indigenous, whoa, convergence is absolutely precious. Thank you.
Mm.